Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor, Greg Dooley, and the Pundit, Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
It's the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark, and we are proudly once again presented by Nick Hopwood, who's a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with peak confidence. We highly recommend going to Nick's website at peakwm.com. Greg Dooley, the Professor, joins me. It's always good when you get a win. It's especially good when it comes against Michigan State. I'm not throwing any parties, however.
No parties, but the win by any means necessary was what we had to have. I think there's some hope, and we'll talk about that. That's what I kind of wanted out of this game, Steve. What did you see?
Michigan stopped the bleeding. Davis Warren, Michigan not committing a turnover, not committing a penalty, and not giving up a sack in a 24-17 win. I think that's the things that stand out for me.
And there's the historical stat of Sharon Moore becoming the first Michigan head coach to win his first. Bo lost. Everyone else lost. Benny Usterbaum in 1948. But that was, we talked about the theme, are we reloading or rebuilding? That team was reloading. That was the famous Mad Magicians era in the 1940s, coming off a national championship where many of the guys were back, Steve. So it was a little different, but to Benny O's credit, they repeated and won the national championship in that second year. So hats off to Sharon, though. This is a big one.
And the game didn't start out very strong for Michigan whatsoever. Michigan State dominating the first quarter, 135 yards to 15. Michigan State controlling the clock for 13:21 of the opening 15 minutes.
And Michigan State fans must have been incredibly proud because what they did was take it right to really the strength of our team, which is our defense. And all day they're back. Nate Carter, I got to say, what a fantastic game. I'm like, oh boy, is this one of those standout performances in a Michigan State game that's going to break us? He was busting tackles, several huge first downs for them. Of course, I'm saying this looking back, of course, in a defeat, but it looked like he might be that guy because they didn't go that many times to their fantastic wide receiver, Marsh, who was the other guy you were worried about. But hats off, and they took it to us. But, Steve, against all odds, Michigan, it's felt like we were down several touchdowns. But at the end of the first half, we get that TD. Then we're feeling good, miss the extra point, but come right back and get the sack and fumble and convert that and actually go into the locker room up 9-7. It was a weird feeling in sequence, but I was like, this is all right.
And Michigan was up, and Josiah Stewart got the forced fumble. It was Kenneth Grant who fell on the ball.
Well,
did not try to run in the end zone. Of course, people in the press box were going, why not a scoop and score? Maybe USC is the reason why you don't scoop and score.
Remember USC, the guy came right around and grabbed the ball away from him. And he is a guy who seemed like would like to do that. But, hey, either way, let's hats off because it worked out great. And Michigan made a really nice play to get within field goal range and, of course, converted. Unlike State on that first drive, by the way, Steve, boy, a much different game. They could have probably gone for it that far down where they were, but they wanted points. It seemed like for sure points. And, Steve, their kicker was, 15 for 16, Jonathan Kim?
Yep.
And just shanked it.
It was literally an extra point.
Yeah.
It's from the 7-yard line because of the delay of game. But Michigan State was going to go for it. Then they couldn't get the signal in time, and then they took the delay of game, went to kick the field goal, got nothing. That's one of those things when people talk about what is the difference between home and the road. Some of it has to do with crowd noise. Just some of it has to do that you're in a different atmosphere and you're in a different field. That's just one of those subtle things. It's an intangible. And I think you kind of saw that. I don't think you would have seen that at Spartan Stadium inside
it's a great
the red
point.
zone.
He doesn't miss it like that from that distance. Who knows? But it doesn't seem like there was anything wrong with the snap and hold. I could be wrong, but it seemed like it was fine.
I don't think Michigan State would have had a delay of game penalty that would have resulted in them attempting that field goal.
There you go. But we did some other things, and we got it going in the second half.
And Michigan goes into their bag of trickery. Donovan Edwards could be our best quarterback or our second best quarterback. What do you think, Greg?
I don't know. He has a nice touch. It's easier to see. I'm sure it's harder on the field because they did let Loveland go. But it did look like he did that slow stutter step to slow down, like he was getting ready. Yeah. And then, of course, he's gripping the ball a little differently. And, it wasn't a dart, but he throws a nice ball.
He has thrown one pass each and every single season, Greg. 2 touchdowns in those 4 passes. He's averaging 33 yards per pass. And how about this? a 540 quarterback efficiency rating.
Okay.
540.
So he is our second best quarterback.
The leaders in the Big Ten are like 170. J.J. McCarthy was like a 170 efficiency rating. He's 540. Now, it's 4 passes, and that's why there are minimum requirements to actually be put on the board. But, man, that's pretty good.
I have a feeling Dono, if he heard that, is going to tell everyone in Schembecker Hall about his quarterback rating. But we had a little back and forth, but Michigan looked really good. In fact, Warren got on a little streak of completions, which is like, wow, this is great. Threw some really nice balls. They put him in a good position. Then we get up 2 scores. We make the 2-point conversion to put us up 14. And State comes back and scores the game, then they march right down the field, and hats off to them. Now we're midway through the fourth quarter, right? I feel like a little bit of a hush over the crowd, right? We're getting throaties now. Are we gonna let this go? Are we gonna blow it?
Well, I understand why. I mean, Michigan has watched fourth quarter leads or second half leads start to disappear, and you start doing the math in your head. Okay, Michigan State took 7 minutes to march down the field. Okay, that's good. Maybe it should have taken even a little bit longer if it wasn't for the big play to Marsh and a couple of broken tackles. But then you're like, all right, can Michigan's offense get a couple of first downs and keep the clock? I mean, it's like there's 6 minutes left, and Michigan State has all their timeouts plus a 2-minute timeout. That's 4 timeouts. They're going to have a really long drive not to give Michigan. Well, what did Michigan do? They went 3 and out, got a yard.
Yeah.
And I think that had everybody on social media really, really ticked off because
it was a bad
got
punt,
the
too.
least amount of performance you would have hoped for from the Michigan offensive side of the ball. And then it's on your defense not to give up a fourth quarter lead.
And the punt landed at midfield. I got to say, Steve, on the touchdown, and I know people disagree, but there's a lot of coaches that automatically go for 2 there. When it's the whole math, when you're down 2 touchdowns, it's midway or late in the game. The assumption is you need to score 2 touchdowns, so go for 2 on the first one. See if you get it. If you miss it, obviously go for 2 again. But probability-wise, it gives you the best chance to win the game. I didn't even see Jonathan Smith flinch. A lot of coaches automatically go there, and a lot of fans are puzzled, especially because, A, they have a running quarterback who they didn't use very much to run the ball, which we'll talk about. They got Nick Carter, who's having a fantastic game running the ball. And he's a little worried because he's got his linebacker out. I was a little surprised. No big deal. Didn't matter in the end. Got it done. But just one of those little things. I was expecting the offense to come back out after they scored the first one.
Something they do more often in the pros than in college. Yeah, the nerd maths, it's slightly over 50%, so you go ahead and do it that way. It just hasn't caught on naturally. And then there's other elements about it, the road team versus the home team. How are you doing inside the 5-yard line?
Absolutely.
I mean,
it's 20-year-old kids. I get it.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of things you have to factor, but this one seemed to stack up where it probably, to me, was the right move.
Michigan didn't win the rushing battle, didn't win the passing battle either, but somehow won the game.
Won the war, lost all the battles.
Didn't turn the ball over, didn't give up a sack, and it didn't give up a penalty. Only the 7th time in the 55 years where that has happened in the Michigan State rivalry, though that's
the rushing battle?
The rushing battle.
Yeah, because that used to be talked about like that was the thing, and we talk about it a little less, but you have to bring it up. You have to bring it up.
It's like now the 5th time in 15 years. So, somewhere in that ballpark, Greg, maybe it's the 6th time in 17 years.
Yeah,
it's starting to become a little more frequent than 95% of the time.
Yeah, and I do think that significance is waning. I mean, this is a hard-nosed game where you think about rushing in a cloud of dust and all that good stuff, but probably less important. We definitely would have expected and hoped to get more out of Mullings and Edwards in conventional running, but Orji was a huge, huge plus for us. I will say, I'll add this again, that I was a little surprised that Aiden Childs didn't take off and run a little more. He tried a few times, but I thought there were a few moments there where he had space and didn't do it. And I don't know if that was him, if that was the coaches telling him use your arm. He played a pretty good game, being a young man in a hostile game where, by the way, let's just remember, this is a big game for Michigan. This is Michigan State's game. There's no question who their rival is. This means so much to them. Hats off. They played a nice game, but Michigan got it done in the end.
A couple of things did surprise me. Now, let's first talk about your surprise. Aiden Childs, the last 2 games, rushed for 11 and rushed for 12. And those were by far the most that he had throughout the rest of the season. So you could see that there was a conscious effort to have Aiden Childs run the ball more often in the last 2 games Michigan State played, whether that was by design or by running for your life. I don't know if that was the intent, but you saw the rush totals, you saw the numbers that were good, and you thought that would be happening a little bit more. The other thing I was kind of surprised about is when I was doing the pregame show on the Countdown to Kickoff for WTKA was that if the offense is stuck to their identity, they had a better success and a chance for win. And so in Michigan's case, they run the ball better than they pass. And Michigan State defends the pass better, but doesn't defend the run as well. So that should be advantage to Michigan if you stick with your identity.
But look what happened.
I know. And then Michigan State, it was exactly the same for them as well. Michigan State is a better passing team than they were a running team. The statistics have shown that and borne that all season. Yet they emphasized on trying to run the ball more than they did pass the ball. Now, early on, especially in the first drive, Nate Carter and the Spartans drove down the field at will. But now that it's in hindsight and you see the couple of plays, like at the end again, where Nick Marsh gets one over the middle, breaks a couple of tackles, and gets in the end zone, that was Michigan State's identity, at least in terms of their success, was being able to pass the ball. You're talking about a Michigan State rushing team that basically had only 3 or 4 rushing touchdowns by their running backs and weren't getting significant yards per carry or total yards per game. But yet both teams decided not to do what they normally do. And maybe they're just trying to outsmart. I know that you may know, so I'm going to do something different.
Yeah, and then Marsh, they had a lot of success with their wide receiver Marsh, and we did a good job containing him. On the touchdown he scored, you saw how much talent that dude has, man. When he stopped, turned directions, broke away from the DB, and then went to daylight and scored. You're like, wow. And you look at his size, he's a weapon.
And he's just a freshman. And going back to the running situation a little bit more in rushing quarterbacks, Alex Orji, I thought, was utilized in the offense, I think, the way that most everybody wanted to see him be utilized in. If there were third and shorts, hey, let's put Alex Orji into the game, or let's give him a couple of series and let's do what he does well to mix things up. And I think that was the first time I've kind of really seen since the beginning of the season in the opener Fresno State, where it wasn't just one quarterback playing straight through. There was a mixture, and Michigan got that and used that to its advantage.
Oh, totally agree. And boy, he's a crafty runner. I hope we find more ways to get him the ball, maybe just not out of the direct snap. Are there some other ways we can use him? Because it does seem like we're going to go with Warren, if healthy, for the rest of the year after that performance. But you want to see Orji in there. I want to see him in different ways because you cringe a little bit when he's in there because you know basically what's going to happen. He's either going to go left or right when he's going to run it. Orji I'm talking about. I just like to see some different things. But, of course, it worked. And that's what we're talking about. And that's why we're joyous, Steve, after a win. What else?
Yeah, well, and Alex Orji, when given the opportunity, so it was 6 minutes left in the game, Michigan up by a score. They got like a yard or two and had to punt away and chalked up about a minute and a half off the clock. There's a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes left in the clock when Michigan gets the ball back after turning away Michigan State. The play of the game to me, turning away Michigan State on 4th down inside the Michigan red zone. Michigan getting that stop, Quentin Johnson with the pass broken up in the middle of the end zone.
Upset that he didn't intercept it, but we didn't really want him to.
No.
Yeah.
Not really. But anyway, Michigan gets a second chance to ice the clock, and they put it in Alex Orji's hands, and that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, no, that was clutch. Bright side, Steve, you mentioned it. No turnovers. That was a killer. No penalties. No sacks given up. Right. And we've been plagued by turnovers all year.
Yeah, Michigan's had 15 turnovers through 7 games. Now it's 15 turnovers through 8 games. And guess what? It's the mirror of last year, where the Wolverines had 8 turnovers through 15 games last season.
As far as the clean play, it's wonderful. You wonder if this is what they thought the offense could look like and hoped it looked like and maybe looked like in practice with Orji and Warren. Maybe they did have to pull out some tricks to really jumpstart the offense, but maybe this is what it's going to look like moving forward, and I think we'll take it. I think we'll take it. What else?
And now what's important is not only you beat your rival, and you don't have to hear it from Michigan State fans, which, by the way, speaking of Michigan State fans, Michigan and Michigan State fans both very quiet leading into this one. Nobody was chirping up, speaking with gross hyperbole, not a lot of trolling going on this week.
No.
But Michigan needed this to get one win away from being bowl eligible. This game against Michigan State was the second easiest game left on their schedule. now you can get that bowl eligibility with Northwestern. I know this sounds silly. Like, let's be happy and proud about being bowl eligible. It's a lot better than not being bowl eligible. The embarrassment is a lot further if you don't. Northwestern is your best chance, and you get them at home on November 23rd.
Yeah, and we beat Northwestern. We retain every trophy that is winnable, and that long row of trophies we're probably not going to add anymore. We're going to put in there. So what it comes down to, you talked about pregame, and I did see an Ohio State fan popping off pregame, which was the weirdest thing.
It always happens.
Yeah, like what? Like, shut up. We beat you 3 times in a row. Just quiet down, man. What are you doing here? So pregame, if you ask what I wanted, obviously win. Just win the game, okay? And somehow give us a step up on offense. Give us some hope that there's something we can put out there on the field on offense that can compete when Oregon comes to town. And I feel like, Steve, I'm not saying we're going to beat Oregon, but there's hope now that we can have enough pieces and parts where we can compete next Saturday. That's the hope. I got what I wanted out of this one. So there you go.
Donovan Edwards sticks up for Davis Warren in the postgame presser. Both probably knew a little bit about what it's like to have some adversity, what it's like to not play as much as you think you're going to. Usually when a player is allowed to go, they can't get off the chair fast enough.
Yes.
Get undressed, get ready to go, be back with your teammates, and resume your life. Donovan wanted to sit down and add a few words and gave a speech about
something about this guy.
gave us a speech about Davis Warren, which I just thought was nice of him to do. I could tell that Davis Warren certainly appreciated that. And I asked him at the end of the presser, was there anything that he felt he needed to prove? He's been sitting down for a month, maybe never getting another opportunity again, and your mind starts to probably think, hey, if I get one more opportunity, this is what I'll show you how I'm different. He said there was none of that. In fact, he said if he actually put emotion into it, that he probably would have made mistakes that would have cost his team. Trying to do maybe a little too much or something like that in an emotional state to prove that he belongs on that field and be the number one starter and never be questioned again. Instead, he just only had to prove himself that he could do what he did, certainly got the win, and did it without getting a turnover.
It's historic. Anytime you beat Michigan State and you're the quarterback, it's historic. And I got to say, it was really cool to see that microphone stuffed in his face on the post game by Big Ten. Like, this guy off the mat, you didn't even know if we were going to see him again this year, Steve,
right.
Play a down, and he leads the team on offense to a win over Michigan State. It's huge. And props off to Donovan for doing that. He's captain. That's how captains act. And he did the right thing by backing him up. I don't know. How much did this come up in the postgame, Steve? Loveland. I don't know who the guy across from him was. But on the final snap, of course.
This What Really Happened replay.
There's a shove by the Spartan. State had conceded.
Right.
Loveland's blocking the end. The end pushed straight out hard at his head, throat area. Loveland came back and smashed his face mask right in his face, eyes up. It wasn't a top of the crown. It was in his face. Obviously, there were also words. We don't know what they were yet. So all those things happened. I don't think the fight happened, Steve. However, if the guy doesn't yank Loveland's head down with 2 arms and pull his head all the way down to his waist, I don't think we have a fight. I think there's shoving between them and all that. So I will say, yes, Loveland shouldn't have smacked his helmet in his face and got right in his face like that. First move, though, I think was the unnecessary shoving on when the game was over by the Spartan. That started it. Loveland threw flames on it, but there's no fight if the Spartan guy doesn't yank his head down, is the way I see it.
And then I think it was Mullings who jumped on top after that, and that's what got the rest of the teams involved. And it just shows that there's escalation. It could start with words. It could start with grills hitting one another, and then it escalates from there.
So
in the long run of the story, I don't think it's a big deal. Actually, a generally clean game that didn't have a lot of, unsportsmanlike conduct penalties.
Yes, that's the bigger surprise. And the targeting, which it was not like an evil targeting call that knocked their linebacker out. I don't think that was intended to be dirty. And that really hurt State, in my opinion, that he got tossed. I'm not saying he shouldn't have. Dude, I'm not getting into this, like what's targeting, what's not. It did look like his crown of his helmet was down, but come on, I just hate it. And that really hurt them, but it wasn't like a dirty thing where you normally see in this game a lot of dirty. There was a lot of like throw the guy down type hits in the game for sure. So it was definitely a tough game, but you didn't see that.
One of the things about targeting recently among officials, they're actually starting to look back at intent anymore. It used to be letter of the law. Like, here is the Webster's dictionary of what targeting is, and even though it seems like an accident, this is what happened, this guy's got to go. I think they're actually starting to change a little bit and frame intent a little more often. May not have been done in this particular case, but we've also seen this with replay. The idea that by definition it has to be absolutely without a shadow of a doubt, otherwise the call stands. We saw in the Michigan State game in 2021 where Aiden Hutchinson got that strip sack on Michigan State that was called back, and they were putting pieces of the cameras together and made an inference from there. And we're seeing that now in the NFL. So these things are starting to modify. What
you're talking about, a common scenario was one or both players make a sudden move that puts them in the position where the helmets are aligning, and it wasn't intent. And
right.
And I'm with you. And again, back if you want to legislate the Hayden Hutchinson thing, you're talking to two guys that kind of understand why they made that call. Many, maybe the only ones out there, but I understand it. My problem with that is if it takes 17 different angles to figure that out, then maybe they should have left it alone. That's my only thing about that. But I see where they came up with the rationale to make that call. Whether you agree with it or not, you can kind of see where they came up with it.
And we're seeing it in the NFL now, where you're having a split screen with multiple cameras. It wasn't too long ago where if you didn't have it definitive, you weren't allowed to piece it together.
Yeah.
But now they're allowing things to be pieced
together.
together.
And we see it in basketball with the which did it touch his index finger on the ball.
That's a problem I've got.
Yeah. Here we go.
Here we go. This is a problem that really irks me. Maybe things I only care about.
Okay. I don't know. It irks me too. And I hear the NBA, for instance, is talking about having AI be involved in some of those type of things, like guy out of bounds or ball or who did it last touch.
Well, here's my point. And this is why I get angry about these things. Anytime that an offensive player has the ball and it's stripped by a defensive player, the person last touching it in that 100th of a second is the player who had the ball.
Very often.
It will always be that way.
Yes.
But this, he touched the ball and it was forced loose, but you could see as it goes off his fingertips, it's off the fingertips of the offensive. Look, it's stabbed, it's pierced by the defensive player, and the defensive player is ruled the last person to touch it.
Right. The rules of physics and pressure and points of pressure, it's two people touch it. Very often it's off the person who's holding it, just the way it works. Yes, it's ridiculous. One last thing on Loveland. Yes, he called Michigan State Lil Bro 3 times with the microphone in his face. Mm-hmm. But Steve, I got to go back to your point where you talk about these things, and winning is so important. And the victor in the public's eye, we're not going to. He's a villain to Michigan State fans, and that's never going to change. But in the other atmosphere that is college football, Michigan won the game. Here's the microphone right after the incident. Colston Loveland, who was very involved in it. The winners tend to control the narrative. They tend to be viewed on the right side of these things. And I symbolically merely handing Loveland the microphone to explain himself, and of course he goes off on Michigan State, to me is a demonstration of that, right? In the public's eye, Michigan State lost. There was a fight after the game. I'm just telling you, and State fans are going to hate me saying this. It's true. It's just true.
The biggest example of this is when Devin Bush started cutting up the Spartan logo and why he did it. And I remember at the time and seeing things live, the first thing I tweeted out was, Michigan had better win this game because the narrative would change drastically if Michigan State had won. And Michigan State fans probably still feel shafted that their narrative wasn't being told. And the reason why it wasn't being told or believed in, that's the most important part.
Yeah.
Believed in. It was told, but not believed in, simply because Michigan won the game. And that's generally what happens in society.
The tunnel thing would be, I'm not saying there wouldn't have been state players involved in sanction, whatever they did, the Big Ten. it would have been different had Michigan State won that game. It would have been viewed different. It would have been treated differently. Sorry, it's how it works. We redo the order of things in our head, and then things become petty because you're the loser and all this stuff. So spot on, Steve, per usual. Is it time for halftime?
It is. That means it's halftime on The Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. And our sponsor, Nick Hopwood from Peak Wealth Management, has been sitting in the bullpen, chomping on the bit to be able to get inside here. And Greg, you and I were talking on the way up about HSAs and the discussions you've had with Nick.
One of your favorite tools is the HSA, the health savings account. And I know this is another thing that you promote, tweet, encourage. Tell us really in a nutshell why you really encourage people to consider this.
It's because of the triple tax-free benefit, and I honestly, as much as I love Roth, HSAs I love even more. People don't know about the HSA. People are not taking advantage of it. They're using it the wrong way, and it's a real opportunity cost.
And I know we're talking about health expenses. It's like saying, I'm putting money aside to breathe oxygen. We all need it.
100%.
Right?
It depends on what your health insurance plan is, what you choose. So my family is relatively young and healthy. So we wanted to choose the option with the smallest premium and the largest deductible. So these types of plans are eligible for a health savings account. And so we choose an HSA compliant or eligible plan. So that's the first step. Then you go to your HSA provider. I use hsabank.com. And then they link to Ameritrade Schwab for the investment piece. When I put the money in, it's tax deductible. When I invest it, it grows tax deferred. And when I pull it out for medical, it's a tax-free withdrawal. Triple tax-free.
Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, so you definitely got me going on it. All right, a couple sights and sounds, Steve. The 1964 Big Ten champions, the 1965 Rose Bowl team, celebrating their 60th anniversary. They used to spend pregame in the golf clubhouse. That's where they used to sleep. They used to have dormers up there, like the beds, the bunk beds. And that's where they had their celebration Friday night. They were honored in the first quarter of this game. Bob Timberlake, the quarterback, a bunch of other guys, Captain Jim Conley, who I've written kind of a piece about that season about. My friend, a family friend, Barry DeLynn was on Prem. A lot of the guys that looked really good. But you got to take, because I don't know how many guys are going to be around for the 70th anniversary of this team, and it's cool that we do this thing. You might notice, Steve, there was no celebration for the 1984 6-6 Bow team out there.
No, there wasn't.
So we celebrate the winners. Their one loss that year was to Purdue, of all people. Steve, Bob Greasy led Purdue. Michigan scores a late touchdown, could have tied the game, went for two, missed the 2-point conversion. Purdue wins. Michigan wins the rest of their games, including in Columbus, and throttles Oregon State in the Rose Bowl and just barely denied a national championship.
We got to go for it. I think you got to go for two if you're looking at winning a national championship.
All
Jeez,
right.
that was 60 years ago. That means these guys were 82, 83 years old.
A lot of them look really good. Some of them nicks and cuts, and I got to say it. You know, we talk about compensating these players. I happen to know a few of them struggling with things that happen, dementia, just struggling getting around, obviously physically, but also mentally. This game just takes a toll on you, Steve, and it's the right thing to do to compensate these players while they're playing it. And I know the equipment is so much better. In fact, the players today, did you know this, Steve, actually get a fully customized helmet to their best measurement and specifications of their heads. Very expensive process to do, but there's so much good technology, yet we still see things like Tua and other players getting injured, and we don't know the full effects of this game quite yet. We haven't studied it long enough. But anyway, while they're doing it, even in college for this short amount of period, they should be compensated. So, Steve, the Ducks are coming to town, and can I add one more little historical element?
Of course.
And this is
you are the professor.
This
you
is
should
pretty
be
fascinating.
doing this.
Yeah, this is pretty. So while I was in Lansing, I did my talk in Lansing to the U of M club. It was great. Regent Sarah Hubbard was there. The mayor of Lansing was there. Star-studded event. Had a great talk, but one of the guys in the crowd asked me about gambling. And the onset of gambling, is it going to change the game? Are there going to be any issues with the game? And, I talked about how the data they have, and they're really good at identifying irregularities and all this. But we actually have a history with Oregon. They came to town in 1960, and off the airplane, one of their players was approached by apparently a mobster or someone with gambling ties from New York City and offered money to throw the game. It was a back. They played both ways back then.
The Michigan-Oregon game of
Yes,
1960.
the Michigan-Oregon game. One of the Oregon players, a guy named Mickey Bruce, was asked to lay down on defense and was offered money to try to get the Oregon QB in on it. Bruce did not go for it. He told his coach, and they shut the thing down, but the FBI got involved. A Senate subcommittee heard all the evidence and everything like this. The scheme was foiled. Michigan won this game 21-0, but it was a big headline back in the day that there was an attempt to throw the game, believe it or not. As far as we know, it didn't happen, even though Oregon lost 21-0.
Did Michael Corleone testify in the Senate hearing?
I think there were characters in families from New York that were probably mentioned or alluded to in The Godfather. So this came right out of the city, and they saw an opportunity and went for it, and it did not work. And yeah, it made big news. And this, gambling in sports and the sanctity of it. If you follow baseball, you know how important that is to baseball historically, from the Black Sox scandal up to Pete Rose. So yeah, this got the attention of the nation, and we don't like to talk about these things very much because this is like a threat to college football. So we don't tell these stories a lot. I stubbed my toe on it. I don't even know how. I was doing some research on the early 60s and saw this article. I go, wow. So I have a feeling it's going to be talked about a little bit this week. But Oregon comes in. As we talked about, hey, this is one good thing of being down is you have all these opportunities to face some of the top teams in the country and redeem yourself or show well. Here's a big one because these guys are number one.
The number one team in the country, and during the offseason, Greg, they loaded up their roster as well as anybody, including Ohio State. They've become a top 10 recruiting class over the last 3 years, and they've also loaded up very heavily with NIL transfers. That's a team that lost a lot from last season, and then they brought in a lot for this season. Their head coach, Dan Lanning, valued early on joining the Big Ten that the strength you need in the trenches on both sides of the ball, and he went and tried to do that through NIL purposes. And Dylan Gabriel, the leading quarterback statistically in the Big Ten. They have Tez Johnson, a top 2 receiver in the Big Ten. And running back Jordan James is statistically a top 5 running back in this conference, while the O-line made it their summer goal to win the Joe Moore Award. And I thought that their toughest competition would come from Texas and LSU. I don't necessarily think Oregon is going to win it, but they're certainly right up there. Defensively, they beefed up in the middle. They got Washington's best corner to switch sides in this rivalry. And less known, but probably better Uiagalelei brother, Mateo.
Yes. Good job with that, Steve, by the way. You crushed the last name.
Thanks.
I heard you mention it on the pregame show today, but go ahead.
Yeah, and Jordan Birch, those two guys have combined for 10.5 sacks this season. So they're absolutely loaded on offense and defense. Speaking of Washington, their styles are similar. Their pieces are similar, except that Oregon is just better at every single spot. Gabriel's better than Will Rogers at QB. Tez Johnson and Ethan Stewart are better receivers than Denzel Washington and Giles Jackson. Not that Jackson and Boston are bad. They're just saying, Michigan's played Washington already. These players at these positions and offensive styles are similar. They're just better at Oregon. And then in the O-line, as I mentioned, overwhelmingly better than Washington's at this point. The biggest problem for Michigan is something that I think any kid in elementary school could point out. Oregon has played only one game where they didn't score 30 points. Michigan has played one game where they scored 30 points. The Ducks averaged 35 a game. Michigan got to 30 in the opener. Thanks, Will Johnson, on that one. Michigan is going to open up as a 2-touchdown underdog after beating Illinois, Michigan's most recent opponent before Michigan State, 38-9 on Saturday.
I remember Al Borges, I think we were having a conversation, and he said something about needing to score 30 points. And I said, Al, if this team scores 30 points a game, we're going to the playoff and maybe more. Okay, we ain't scoring 30 points a game. So the Ducks are powerful. It'll be exciting. Obviously, they've made a trip to the Big House before, but this will be really cool. And I'm curious to see other fans. So we'll, depending on the weather, by the way, was beautiful once again for another game at Michigan Stadium. And of course, this was a night game. This will be 3:30, so we will get a little bit of tailgating feel and vibe for how they travel and all that stuff. And being number one, I expect a few more people to make the trip from Oregon for this one.
Oregon sales were, I wouldn't say bad. It's just that it was not as high as those two games I mentioned. It's taking a lot longer to sell. Eugene, of course, is obviously a lot smaller, probably less big money people, although Oregon does have one big money guy.
Who was here after the Appalachian State game. Phil Knight was here. I remember seeing him walk upstairs from the field, and he had a big binder with him. I assume was the playbook or something, Interesting cat. He was rumored to go to Dominic's before the game and buy rounds of drinks for everybody at Dominic's where they have the sangrias. Maybe there's more interest from Michigan fans now who maybe resigned that this was going to be a horrible game. Maybe there's more interest. So we'll see how it goes. Around the Big Ten, one of the big stories remains Indiana, and of course, game day. Obviously, this is their first time ever going. Why would they else go for a football game in Bloomington, Indiana? They did. The Indiana fans showed out, spent all night, as many of the students do, had an awesome scene, an incredible game. And I got to say, Steve, I was hoping Indiana would use this time to retire, in quotes, Lee Corso, who, of course, was an Indiana head coach, and they honored him, and he wore like an old throwback jacket. I was kind of hoping that they'd say, Coach, it's been a great run. This is your last time. We're gonna move you to a new special segment of tasting tailgate food. You're done. There was one more moment too. And
it's funny that you say that Indiana wanted to retire Lee Corso. ESPN still hasn't done it yet. But go ahead.
They haven't, and it's not to say I'm not sympathetic. I know he's had some medical issues and things like that. I just think it's time to get him off the main desk. That's all.
And you're not the first one to notice this because there have been many tributes, like 15-minute tributes to Lee Corso. My wife doesn't sit there and watch game day like in front of the sofa, but anytime she like enters a room, she's like, "You're spending a lot of time, celebrating Lee Corso. Is this his final broadcast?" She's asked this maybe 4 or 5 times in the last.
Exactly.
And she's not asking in a way like you are in hopes. She just like saying, "Boy, they are really treating him nice. Is this the end for him?" And it's like 4 or 5 times. It's like, "Oh, here's the 500th headgear pick. Here's Lee returning to his roots.
Yeah.
Here's Lee celebrating 30 years."
Well, and it's funny. It's funny you point this out, Steve, because they spend a lot of time celebrating themselves with the Washington State 600, games in a row with the Washington State flag flying and all of the headgear statistics and all this stuff. They spend a lot of time talking about their own legacy.
That's not the first accusation on ESPN I've heard about this.
Yeah.
Yes, nobody celebrates themselves better and more than ESPN does.
You said it. So there was a moment where the mayor of Bloomington, who no one cares about, I'm sure she's a fine woman, but no one wants to see her. They gave him a plaque, and he's just standing there. And apparently the plaque had several paragraphs of accomplishments and things they wanted to have on this plaque. And she proceeded to read the entire thing on a live broadcast. And I'm like, give me the gist, Mayor. He was great. Here's a plaque. It's going to hang in City Hall. Here you go, Coach, or here's the key to the city, or whatever.
Right.
She read the entire words of the plaque. And again, this is probably another thing that Greg only cares about, but I can imagine the producers the guys in the truck at ESPN going, give her the hook. Yeah. Give her the hook. Cut away.
They're kicking off in Bloomington, by the way.
Go to McAfee's field goal kick for $100,000 or something. It was painful.
And by the way, you spoke in East Lansing to do you said the mayor was at your
speech. The mayor, a Michigan alum, by the way.
Did you get a plaque?
I didn't get a plaque.
Were you retired?
I was. I felt. I was probably my last time going back up there, but the crowd was awesome. They were very cool. They were great. And I shared that I actually was a beneficiary of a quote-unquote scholarship. They actually, when I was a senior in high school, the Club of Lansing gave me a stipend, which was actually sent to me at South Quad in Ann Arbor, which I appreciated very, very much. In fact, I don't mind sharing. I paid it back and paid it forward. I wrote them a bigger check on that night and gave it to them. as a thank you. But a big thanks to Lori and the whole people. They're wonderful people up there. And by the way, I got to say, did I talk Regent Hubbard's ear off about my thoughts on revenue sharing and what we should do with all this stuff? Yes, I did. She sat right next to me.
Hey, Greg, how about the Cliff Notes version of that? Don't be the mayor of Bloomington.
No, I won't. I'm not. We'll get into it another time. But I'm back to my themes that I don't think if we're rechanging the whole model, which we are, why is Michigan, the University of Michigan Athletic Department, still paying full rate back to the academic side of the house for all the scholarships that we consume? It's an antiquated, nice notion that was used to appease a lot of academics to say at least they pay for themselves. Well, the athletic department has paid for itself and the rest of Michigan with all the building names that you see 100 times over. So let's, instead of like, hey, should we have a bunch of advertising in the stadium? Maybe, but also maybe we should stop paying full rate back for the scholarships back to the university. This isn't a trivial number, Steve. If we stopped doing that or made it just the state rate, the in-state rate for all athletes, it would effectively, in an accounting way, add $10 to $15 million. I'm done. All right.
Who has more money, the university or the athletic department?
The university.
Okay.
The athletic department revenue is about a little over 1%, Steve, about 1.5% of the entire university budget, which includes the health system. All right. We almost had a nice thing to cheer about, too. Our Buckeyes, Steve, the hated Buckeyes at home, need to do a few things late in the game to get by your ever-collapsing and ever-laughable Cornhuskers, Steve. Ouch. This does not look like a team, a $20 million team, that is going to win the national championship. So if we take a little bit of schadenfreude and pride in the, yes, they won, but somewhat suffering Buckeyes.
Toughness, that's it. Physicality, cross the board, finish it off, having guts.
Yeah, they're got to be asking a lot of questions up there.
Nebraska had a couple of possessions to take the lead over Ohio State. They lose by 4, 21-17. I mentioned this last week on the podcast. Indiana beats the Huskers 56-7 the previous day. What does Ohio State do? Now, if Ohio State wins by 40, we don't have a conversation. But they won by 4, and Nebraska could have won the game. Yeah, there's some comparisons that are going on because this is two teams that played each other in back-to-back weeks. And in addition to that game, there's 3 teams that remain unbeaten in the Big Ten, and Ohio State plays 2 of them. Indiana and Penn State next week. So, Greg, the Big Ten game of the week is going to be Ohio State at Penn State, a game at the beginning of the season that I didn't think Penn State had a shot in heck of beating the Buckeyes. Now I'm very, very curious to how that is going to play out, and both teams now have injury issues. For Ohio State, they had already lost their left tackle last week for the season. Their backup left tackle that played in the Nebraska game was atrocious. If this was a Michigan player, MGO Blog would be talking about this for the entire week, about what is Ohio State going to do. Do they go to their third left tackle? Do they shift over a left guard to play the left tackle? It was just not a very good situation. Penn State's defense is absolutely excellent, and they're going to be able to exploit that left side of the line. Now there's also a problem with Penn State on the injury front. Drew Aller doesn't play in the second half in Penn State's 28-13 win over Wisconsin. Aller went to the locker room after taking a sack late in the first half, came back with a brace on his left knee. It is undetermined whether he would have been able to go or not, but James Franklin said, you are sitting down and we are going to take our chances with our backup quarterback. And again, they won. But the Buckeyes and Nittany Lions next Saturday, both fan bases pretty nervous into this one. So much on the line. For Penn State, they want to join the party, something that they haven't been able to do since 2016. They've always been feeling now like they're the third best team in the Big Ten because of Michigan's ascension, winning the national championship, and Ohio State always being there on a regular basis. Penn State hasn't beaten Ohio State since that block punt in Happy Valley in 2016. And then for the Buckeyes, you lose one more game, you're not playing in the Big Ten championship.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're out of the playoff, but you're not even playing in the Big Ten championship as one of the top 2 teams.
Because you're not going to catch Oregon or even probably Indiana, but now you're also behind Penn State, and you've lost to those two teams. So tiebreakers and all that stuff,
Exactly.
you're going to be in deep trouble.
And the early line on Ohio State is they are -3.5, a favorite on the road in Happy Valley. It is a huge game that I'm looking forward to seeing. It is at noon. Won't be seeing it because the countdown to kickoff will be broadcasting the pregame for Oregon. So that's at 11:30. So I'm going to miss that.
All right, we sympathize. A quick around the nation. We got one team left unbeaten in conference play in the SEC. They're beating each other up. What's going on here?
And you'd be really surprised when I tell you who it is. Texas A&M is the one undefeated team left in the SEC. Everybody else has taken a loss. Texas A&M beating LSU. They're in sole possession of first place in the SEC. Just a few more weeks ago, maybe the Aggies are going back to the SEC title. Going back to the SEC title? I wonder if they've even played in the SEC title game.
Wild. Yeah, there is this undercurrent of these surprising teams like Vanderbilt, who showed again really well. The Naval, I know Navy got smoked by Notre Dame, but having a good season. Army, Indiana. In an era where I think you would have thought with NIL, the beast and the big teams would just get better. And you've seen this, and maybe it's something we talk about in the future, Steve, but it has been an interesting undercurrent of the season that some of these surprising things have happened with the competition level. And again, we'll play it out. Steve, do we have time for things only we care about?
Yes.
We do. Good.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Everybody knows nobody cares.
No one cares.
Nobody cares.
I care.
Then do whatever you want.
Do you have one? I have one. I feel like I'm down.
You always have one. That's the thing.
Yeah, I think about these things a lot. All right. I'll start with one, Steve. I can't stand how much they talk about LeBron James and the Lakers on ESPN. And I'll add somebody else now because I suffered through it all morning. Aaron Rodgers. And wherever Aaron Rodgers is or what he's doing or where he's in his dark space for 3 days, or the Jets who suck, he's a great quarterback. He's fantastic. I know that. Why do we have to talk about him so much, Steve? It's funny. It doesn't bother me how much they talk about the Cowboys, but they talk about Jerry Jones and they talk about Dak and the different players and the dynamics, and they have fun with it, right? They have fun with Stephen A. Smith. They have fun with either teasing the Cowboys or teasing Jerry and having. I don't mind it. It's insufferable with LeBron. Even when they're out of the playoffs, even when they were done, they still feel obligated to have a segment about LeBron and the Lakers. And during the NFL season, I feel like it's Aaron Rodgers.
Analytics, Greg. It's all about analytics.
You're talking about viewership and stuff?
Yep.
Okay.
So they have all of these guys from Moneyball looking at the ratings, the demographics, and all of that, and they have come to the conclusion that if we talk about Aaron Rodgers, LeBron James, Jerry Jones, Dak Prescott in larger market cities and keep talking about it, it's generating the most peak interest. What they fail to realize is by doing it over and over and over again and going to the well, people like you who are sick and tired of it will eventually just turn it off.
Yes.
And then what happens is, and they'll notice, those analytics guys will say, well, it looks like the people are even watching more about LeBron and Aaron Rodgers more.
I see.
So this is not increased interest in people wanting to know about Aaron and LeBron. It's the fact that everybody else has turned it off, meaning the percentages of those that are sticking around have gotten higher, and it's become perpetual.
Pound for pound, more people are watching because we've turned off so many people who didn't want to watch it. Oh, my gosh, Steve. Well, you just made me care about it more, and I hate it. So thank you. All right. We have every trophy available to win sitting in Schembecker Hall. Paul Bunyan is staying home for one more year. Paul sits, I believe, between the National Championship Trophy, the Brown Jug, and maybe the George Jewett Trophy. There's Paul. So far, they're all remaining, and all the other trophies we have will be there this summer. We just beat Northwestern, and Steve, most importantly, we are still the reigning
state champions
and reigning national champions. Go Blue, Steve.
Go Blue, Greg.
All right.